Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here. Welcome to our 9th session of the Thought Leadership for Systems Transformation Program 2022. We are here with Dr. Chong Kee. We are very happy he's our guest teacher today. We will start by listening to Chong Kee's reflections on our collective narrative, and then we will have time for some Q&A. Chong Kee, please go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to give this presentation. I'm really looking forward to it, and lots of really wonderful people in this group. And I'm so privileged, and I feel very honored that I could share some of the things that I'm thinking through for the last, 10 years or more with you guys. Now, before I start, I want to say that I have been labeled a doom and gloomer by many people, and very often in clearly pejorative ways. And then a few days ago, actually, one person, after reading some of my writing, said to me that, "Oh, your message is the same as a doomer optimist." And I was like, "Really? I never heard that term before." So I looked it up online, and wow, lo and behold, there is a website, doomeroptimist.com. They started in September 2021, so it's a very new thing. And I was looking through some of the stuff they put on, and I thought, oh my God, I'm not alone. So I'm a card-carrying member of a Doomer Optimist. So I want you to know that. And the thing about Doomer Optimist is, I'm so glad I could kind of use this term. Before, I always thought, gosh, I'm kind of struggling with trying to put my thoughts across and thinking that, God, maybe I'm a little too far off, but I'm so glad about this. So the thing about Doomer Optimist is that we want to look unflinchingly at how bad things are now. And so that there's enough motivation towards big, scary, dramatic changes, because we really need to do those big, scary, dramatic changes. If we have started in the 1970s, the changes would be much more gradual for us to get here. But we keep kicking the cans down the road. So by now, we need to do so huge changes in order to avert disaster that you need enormous amount of motivation. And so what I'm going to say today, I'll be very direct, no beating around the bush, no sugarcoating, and it may make some of you feel uncomfortable, but that is in the service of trying to get closer to how things are, because there's so much myth and weird kind of self-delusion surrounding this topic, right? So do I have permission? I'd like to ask for permission, because what I'm going to do may make some of you feel uncomfortable. So would you have permission for me to do that in the service of really grappling with reality? Could I kind of see a show of hand just to be, yeah, everyone's good? All right, is there any objection, any concern that you would like to raise now so that we can address it before I go on? Okay, wonderful. So let's go straight into it then. A lot of the questions I get basically ask me, is this the best solution? What is the best solution? What I'm going to share is not the best solution. I can't know that. Nobody can know that. But what I'm doing is, mathematically, what I'm doing is a process of searching for the local maxima. And that's all we can do. We can all, within our own local community or within our local context, search for local maxima. That's how we have to act. And then once we get there, we see what else is happening, and we do a new search, and we go from there. So the first question I got from you guys was, is doom and gloom a helpful tone for prompting effective action? So let me unpack this word, effective action. What are effective actions? There is only one fundamental effective action. Humanity must live within its Earth carrying capacity. That's it. And there are actually 3 powerful trajectories right now going towards taking this action. And I want to name them. We are not in a situation now where there is an effective action, and we still need to somehow prompt it to happen. Quite the reverse. Our elites, our 1%ers know how bad the situation is, and they are putting in place effective actions. So what are these 3 trajectories? Number 1, let war, disease, famine, natural disaster, and so on reduce global population. Now, this will hit the poorest region worst. And once that happens, wealthy nation can claim the dwindling resources to support their lifestyle. US President George H.W. Bush had already said that openly. He said, the American way of life is not up for negotiation, period. He said, period, okay, at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. What does that mean if America's lifestyle is not up for negotiation? America will continue consuming. Right now is about 5,000 kilos carbon emission per year per person in the US. We'll keep consuming at that level and rising, regardless of what's going to happen to the rest of the world. And as we all know, the countries that have very little contribution to global warming are the ones now suffering the worst effects, whereas the wealthy countries are suffering much less in the north. So very clearly, these countries will face disasters, famines and droughts and diseases leading to civil war. And we see that in Syria and many parts of Africa. And eventually what happens? The multinational and these northern government states will move in and take the local resources. And we already see that happening in all these various oil wars, and we'll see more. For some of you may not know that the Bush family, the very George H.W. Bush that said that, bought more than 100,000 acres of the Guarani aquifer in Paraguay. They are prepared. They are now owning some of the biggest freshwater reserve in the world. It's now under private ownership. So this is the first thing that the elites are doing. They are putting in place a very effective action to combat climate change. That is, kill off everyone else and we hoard the resources so that we can keep living the way we live. Option one. Option two, let the owning class impose consumption quotas. Okay, so the way we can get down to live within our carbon budget is done through top-down imposition of quotas. And the World Economic Forum has also made that public. They said, that's the first thing they said in their big document of the Great Reset, you will own nothing and you will be happy. Now, what they did not say, the second half of that sentence is, we will own everything, laugh all the way to the bank while showing you that we have met every single UN Sustainable Development Goal. That is the basic setup of the structure right now with WEF. So that is the second thing that's being put in place. And this will be very effective action too, because when you own everything, and all of us have to rent, the rental prices will be so high, and that is an effective quota on everything else. Because if you rent, you can't use unlimited amount, unlike you owning something. And that's how you implement quota. But that will be from the top down. And of course, the 1%er will not live within this quota. And there's a mechanism for doing that. I won't even go into it right now. It's called natural asset company, and it's disgusting. But anyway, let's go on. Finally, there's a third option. It is voluntary reduction, community ownership, local self-sufficiency, and resilience. This is the ground up force that is also in place in many different parts of the world, percolating, trying to coalesce. And this is the part that the doomer optimist refers to. The optimist part of the doomer optimist refers to that. We believe that it is possible to do this. Globally, people ground up, voluntarily reduced, and live within the Earth carrying capacity without involving government and giant corporation. Because if they do get involved, you get option 1 and 2. Now, how much do we need to reduce? Well, the US carbon footprint is 5,000 kilos per person per year. If we divide the carrying capacity of the Earth by the total population of Earth, we arrive at between 800 to 1,300 kilos of carbon emission per person per year globally. That number represents the living standard of Nicaragua and Philippines. Nicaragua is around 800 and Philippines around 1,300. That is basically the range where everyone else in the world needs to live so that we have, climate justice. Everyone live at about the same level. You don't get the rich nation getting to live a lot more and the poor nation having to live under a lot less. Now, if you look at Nicaragua and Philippines, I mean, of course, they're not living in the lap of luxury, but they still have cars, they still have a good functioning education system, medical system, food system, and so on and so forth. So it's not the end of the world. It is not living in abject poverty where you're starving, right? But it is still a huge come down. From 5,000 to 800 is a massive drop. So what kind of helpful tone will induce enough people in the developed nations, in the US, Europe, Middle East, Japan, Australia, and so on, in all these developed nations, and even developing nations like China, Russia, Brazil, even India, because India is above that. What kind of tone will induce that? We have to tell the truth. We can't sugarcoat it anymore. It is something like, we do this, or we become slave, or we die. Option one is most of us die. Option two is we become slave of the corporations. Unless we can do option three and pull it off, option one and two will be imposed upon us. To say anything less, to make people think, oh, there's hope, we invented a new battery that has a higher energy density, blah, 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 is to be an accomplice, really, the part of the lie, part of the accomplice to make option one and two happen. Is it possible? I mean, can we truly go from 5,000 to 800? Is it possible? Am I even peddling a pipe dream here? Well, I want to point to you within the USA, an eco-village called Dancing Rabbit. This is a great one to do because this is not feel-good greenwashing, because what they've done has been audited by the University of Missouri professor. I know this very well because I used to chair their board. They have reduced in all aspects, not just carbon footprint, water use, miles per person traveled, and so on and so forth. And on all about more than 10 different matrices, they consume 1/10 of the current US average. That means now that the US average is about 5,000, they consume about 500 kilo carbon emission per year equivalent. It is possible to do it even in the US. And the people there report much happier lives because instead of living in the lap of material luxury and isolation and loneliness and insecurity, emotionally, they have deep connection with each other and they share many, many things and they collaborate as a community to create a really wonderful life. So it is possible, it's happening right now. So this is not a pipe dream, but how do we get there? That is the question on a larger scale. So this is what I want to focus on a lot today. Now, another question I get is, how do we make people aware of the train that's coming, but at the same time do it in a compassionate way so they do not feel like we are just envious of them being in a good mood and enjoying the wonderful view? I like this question because it truly encapsulates what we are facing today. The train is coming. Climate collapse is right down the road. And there are all these people still standing on the track looking at the wonderful view, enjoying their Hummer and their holiday in France and so on and so forth. So given that train situation, we have no time left for niceties. For me, I would simply say to them, the train is coming now. That's it. Give them the information. Let them decide what they want to do. The compassionate thing to do is to give them the information and the means in case they don't know, run this way, to save their own lives. So really, in a truly urgent life and death situation, tone is not the focus. If you want to be a system change person, tone is completely irrelevant. So the next big question is homesteading the best answer for 8 billion people? Now, this question has so much to unpack, right? 8 billion, that's the total population of the world right now. You're asking for a one-size-fits-all solution here for 8 billion, for everyone on Earth. That's kind of hubris, right? But I'm thinking that, what's hiding behind that question to make it sound like hubris is probably something else. Probably there's quite a lot of fear. You're doing a descent from 5,000 to 800. That's a huge amount, right? There's a lot of fear. If everyone does homesteading in the global north, what will happen to the already industrialized economy that we have there? More to the point, what's going to happen to my comfortable life in the city? Right? So maybe that's what motivating this question. Or maybe, if the question is asked by someone in the global south, maybe it's like the global south is already relying on subsistence farming. So how does an idea from, the colonization of America, how is that idea going to help? Because South is already suffering from colonization. So you're right. Homesteading is not the best word to use because it has some historical baggage. But honestly, there's no time to work on tone and all the rest. I'm trying to convey an idea. Homesteading means we do regenerative agriculture, but not on your own, because homestead has always been just based on a single family. So isolated individualism kind of thing. We have to do regenerative agriculture, creating a regenerative food system on a community basis. But you guys are absolutely right when you ask that question, because if enough people in the north commits to growing their own food, creating a regenerative food system, apart from the industrialized agriculture, and live within our own carbon budget, industrialized agriculture and, in fact, the whole industrialized economy will likely collapse. That, in fact, is the point. That's what we need to do. And remember, agriculture in the northern hemisphere, and industrialized agriculture, produces between 25 to 35% of the total global carbon emission. It's a massive contributor. So if we do that, if industrialized agriculture collapses and bring along with it all the other industrialized aspect, global emission will immediately drop by a huge amount. If this happens in time, it will ameliorate climate collapse and slow down mass extinction. And that will buy us time to rebuild civilization on a more regenerative foundation. So yes, I'm advocating for something that will tank industrialized civilization as we know it. But the thing is, no, that's really scary, right? But the thing is, remember, it will collapse on its own anyway from overshoot. Now, if we don't try to tank it now, it will run its own course, trying to shore itself up grabbing more and more of the dwindling resources to prop itself up. By the time it collapses, there'll be no resources left to finesse a soft landing. That's why we must force it to collapse now, and so that we can use the resources saved to build a new regenerative world. And the food system is the first thing we must rebuild, because without that, we will starve when the collapse comes. Right? So only that we don't starve, and then we have the ability and the time to build the rest, to build a new medical system, a new education system, and so on and so forth. But food has to be the first thing. Now, this strategy I'm advocating is number 19 in Sun Tzu's 36 strategy. It's called 釜里抽薪. What it basically says is, you have a pot boiling over. You don't try to stop the boiling by throwing ice into it. That is not addressing the root cause. You do it by pulling out all the firewood underneath. Okay? And then it will stop boiling. It's to pull the firewood out, not throw ice on it. And we have a similar realization in the Western world too. Buckminster Fuller said pretty much the same thing. His famous quote, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. You don't throw ice on the boiling pot. You change something by building a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." That's what we're doing. We're building a new food system, and thereafter, all other new system that will make the existing one obsolete, so that it collapses. When it's obsolete, it collapses. That's what we want to do. All right, so I addressed that for the global north. For the global south, that's always relied on subsistence farming. There are these following forces at play. Number one, slash and burn is degrading soil rapidly. And for example, Lake Chad, right? Lake Chad is one of the biggest freshwater lake in Africa, and it is shrinking. It's been shrinking for the last 20, 30 years, and it's getting worse and worse. And from that, you have conflict between the fishermen, the farmers, the ranchers, the people who are raising livestock, and the city who is near the lake shore. There's all these competing forces now trying to get hold of the dwindling supply of water, which is not enough, and is starting to cause civil war. So slash and burn and grabbing of dwindling resources is happening right now in the global south, in many parts of it. Second, because of climate change, It causing changing in rain and weather patterns. And that is critical because in order to grow food, people have been relying on rain pattern has established for many, many years, and that has changed. The plants are now dying in the heat because the rain that's supposed to come is not coming. And third, we have Monsanto's and Bayer's now, and the Western development model is invading the global South, right? Trying to persuade them that isn't it wonderful if everyone has cars, if we can all live it up, everyone has iPhone, we can live like, Westerners. So we will have to develop, we have to do all these things. These are invading the global South. So these three things are very destructive. However, we also have regenerative traditional farming technique spreading. And I say traditional because a lot of these permaculture techniques, all that, were actually ancient practices, in India, in China, and many parts of the world. So these are not invented in the West. Permaculture is not invented in the West. The work of Cleo and Ignatius is exactly that. They're now popularizing and really rekindling the knowledge of regenerative farming in the global South. And we need a lot more of that. And this is the force they will be fighting these other three destructive forces I mentioned earlier. If the global South is also able to resist the advance of the industrialized agriculture and industrialized economy, then together with those in the North, we can create a pincer attack on the industrialized economy. And that's how we could together help it collapse as soon as possible. Now, when we talk about the global South and climate change, we have to talk about climate refugees. The question about Pakistan and Hong Kong and all these dense areas, what's going to happen when it becomes too hot to live or to farm. Now, I am a climate refugee myself. I'm a climate refugee from San Francisco. Why did I say that? Well, friends in Oregon who are farmers basically saw their farm either burned down during the wildfire or they went bankrupt because of the drought. So I see that happening firsthand when I was living in San Francisco. So I knew that the writing's on the wall. And I left because I felt that climate pressure. And I was lucky because I actually own my tiny little apartment in San Francisco and I sold it. And thank you to the San Francisco housing market. After paying off the mortgage, I have enough money left over to buy a farm in rural Oregon. Now, what I did, people can still do now because the housing market and so any homeowner in any big city could do what I did. But eventually, when climate hit and it disrupts real estate whole market, then that option closes. What I'm trying to say is this: climate-induced migration happened first to those with more information and more resources to move and reestablish. And it progresses towards those with less and less resources until eventually it hits those with the least. And so they become climate-induced migrant after disaster hit rather than before. And this will happen all over the world, not just in global South, but in the wealthy North as well. We really see that in Germany when massive floods just destroy a town. So it's already happening. And there'll be a lot more post-disaster climate-induced migration coming down the line. The sooner we can stop the industrialized capitalist juggernaut, the more we can reduce climate refugee. But climate refugee is already happening, is a reality. The way to stop it is not to throw ice on it, but by stopping the industrial capitalist juggernaut, taking out the fire underneath the boiling pot. So I hope I've convinced you enough, because next set of questions I'm addressing kind of assume that this is something that we want to do. So the next question you guys asked me is, who can benefit most from my specific background, location, and experience? I'm suspecting you're thinking, okay, I'm from academia, I worked in the private sector and finance and tech, so maybe I can convince these people, these are our 1% elites with all the resources. Well, let me tell you this. The Labishire Homestead Common project, I'm specifically looking for young people, generally who are poor, unless they have rich parents, so young poor people who cannot afford to live or work in the city anymore. Why? Because food cost, rent cost, general inflation is making it impossible for a lower wage worker to live in a city. And then gas price hike is making it very hard for them to live somewhere cheap and commute to work in the city. So more and more of them are beginning to realize that the system has no place for them, and they are committed to finding a completely new path. So these are the people I'm looking for. I'm not looking for people who have, lots of options. They are wealthy, they made it in tech, they made it in finance. Because, these guys, they need a certain standard of living. They have to have that, they have so many options. It is very difficult to convince them to do something like this. So I'm not looking to talk to them or to convince them to do otherwise, because that will waste too much time. There are so many people who are so ready to do something different. Go for low-hanging fruit first. These are the base from which we build from. We don't build from the top. It's not going to work. Now, there are some miscellaneous things I'd like to address. Like, are there any institutional challenges to doing what I'm doing? Good news is very little. Okay, if you grow your food and you eat it, no one's going to interfere, right? You're not going through the market. And good thing is the loss of cottage food law now in many states has been passed just in the last 5-10 years. That reduces regulatory standard. So it's very, very minimal and it's very easy for you to pass. They only increase when you try to process your food and try to sell them as something different. Okay, but even then, there is a certain limit. If you sell less than a certain amount per year, and it varies from state to state, but most states have these laws, is again very minimal. So right now, state is not interfering in the rebuilding of the food system. So that's a great thing. Now, the next question is land and resource, right? Thinking about the United States, I'm asked, what can work for those of us who do not have the resources to buy a piece of land and begin farming our own food? That's a great question because a lot of people worry about that. It is solvable. First, you start by joining an established community because you need to do that to learn vital skills. Farming is not easy. It is very complex because you're interacting with nature, and nature is complex, has many, many different levels. Remember, industrialized farming is easy. Why? Because you take in the bulldozer, you go in, boom, you kill everything off, you spray chemical, kill everything off, you plant your plant, and then you spray with fertilizer, hoping that you'll survive. That is easy because you completely discount nature. If you want to farm in a regenerative way, you have to work with nature. It is difficult. Learn that skill. Join communities who are doing that, learn that skill. Only when you really have learned that skill, then go start new ones. Don't just stay there, because we need to make this a mass movement. We can't just be a few isolated places. It's good to be a few isolated places because, if the collapse comes, you're there, the chances of you surviving is higher. But if you want to bring everyone else along, you need to proliferate this solution so that it becomes a mass movement. Otherwise, the rest of the world will still be under option 1 and 2, which is not great. Now, because of remote work, and remote work is probably will stay, a lot of you city folk actually can keep your job and keep your income while you do this. So it is not a massive hurdle. You actually can keep your income, okay? So eventually you may not want to, because once you have a regenerative food source and you have great people in the community and you find ways to support each other, not through the default economy, you might not even want to keep your remote work anymore. But before that, that is definitely a good way to transition slowly and not just do a crazy jump off the cliff. So it is possible to do a slow transition. And there are numerous eco-villages in the US and around the world. So check out Foundation for Intentional Community, FIC, Foundation for Intentional Community, and GEN, Global Eco-Village Network. Just search online, you'll find them easily. Those are an online depository of eco-villages around the world. Hundreds of thousands of them for you to join all over the place. And I want to come back to the Dancing Rabbit Eco-Village again, because the lowest income of a Dancing Rabbit resident is about $9,000 a year. And the average is $12,000 a year. So these guys can do it at that income level. I think that means most people in America can. And finally, access to land. 13 acres in Missouri, I just checked yesterday, is now selling for $40,000. You can pull a few friends together and you can buy 13 acres and start even now, right now. So access to land, yes, it's difficult, but it is really not a big barrier. It is totally doable. Take Labishire Homestead Common here, for example. I've set it up so that It is free to enter. There's no monthly dues to pay. Anyone, even you have zero balance in your bank account, can come and live here and start a community here. I agree. People will say, yeah, but a lot of co-housing, a lot of eco-villages have a higher entry. You have to buy in. That is true. So that's one thing that we need to lower. But the buy-in many places, for example, in Dancing Rabbit, is very, very low as well. Then I get asked this question, is green permaculture cities possible? I understand why. City is comfortable. You want to stay in the city. Can you make this place green and sustainable? That would be wonderful if that's possible. To answer that question, we need to talk about something called the lifestyle footprint. Usually it's measured in kilogram carbon emission per year, but you can also measure it in acre per year, acre of land per year. I'll give you an example why we need to do that. Let's say your lifestyle choice, you decided you want to eat 1 egg per day. To do that, you need to have 1 to 2 productive layer breed chicken. Because typically chicken will lay between 250 to about 300 eggs a year. Now, to do that without industrialized chicken feed, and that's very important, because industrialized chicken feed basically is farming way, way far away with basically all the really destructive farming practices, and then ship that grain all the way to somewhere else and then repackage it and manufacture it into feed and gets distributed in shops. You don't want to do that, right? So you need to grow your own mixture of grain and corn and vegetable. Given we know the per acre yield of every crop now, there's well-established data on that, you will need a certain acreage to grow enough chicken feed to feed your chicken. The last time I did the calculation for myself, I have 7 chicken at that time. I will need about 0.4 acres to support my 7 chicken. So egg is a very expensive food item to decide to eat, but it's possible. And if you do that for everything you want to eat and so on and so forth, you eventually get to a certain acreage that will support your food lifestyle. When I did all this calculation for myself, I get approximately 1 acre per person. And that's kind of very basic food self-sufficiency level. But you eat well. If you read my articles, we grow practically everything. So you actually can eat well using 1 acre per person. So using that number, let's go back and look at city. Oh, by the way, you did it for food, but you also need to do it for water, for energy, for closed loop waste recycling and all that stuff. And also you need to add a good amount of land for all that thing. So if you do that for a city, then you will know how much more land you need in order to make your city truly sustainable and green. I suspect it's not possible for New York City. 1 acre per person, you have to requisition about 1 million acres around you. And the worst thing is you have that much land around you where you have a very concentrated center, and then you have the periphery, there's your green food belt. You'll still need to do industrialized agriculture because they're far away and there are very few people. There's not enough hands on the land to farm. You can't expect people to travel from the city all the way to your periphery to do a farm and then travel back every day, right? Because they're living in the city. And so you need machines. And then you're basically back to a situation where you're doing industrialized agriculture to support the city. So, maybe for small city, 10,000 population, maybe it'll work. But I suspect when you do the calculation for a larger city, it's going to be very difficult. And don't forget, city land is extremely expensive. So it's going to be very costly if you try to convert it to, rooftop, whatever. So how do we move from self-sustainability to community sustainability? So the pathway, I think, and this is one pathway, and there might be many, is this. If enough people leave the destructive food system we have now, industrialized agriculture will collapse. The process of collapse is this. First, it'll consolidate, and then it'll raise prices. The raised price in food will start fueling demand for non-industrialized food and community agriculture. Now, as that go on, there'll be more pressure on these giant ag. Eventually, they'll have to sell land to stay afloat. Otherwise, their big banks will go after them for repaying of their loans and seize their assets. So they might as well sell their land first to keep themselves going. Which means if we do this right, predatory capitalism will start self-destruct. It will start eating itself and self-destruct. And then the land that these guys sell that they used to hoard and destroy through this really poisonous agriculture will now be available for more community regenerative farming. So now we can set up a completely different model that will transition us from existing poisonous agriculture to a regenerative agriculture. In fact, what I'm describing here is almost like a reverse Lewis model development. but we don't have time, so I won't go into that. But look it up. It's almost like poetic justice. How industrialization happened. It happened by sucking resources from the community and from agriculture to fund the city. And now we can start a reverse movement happening. And as communities form that can grow our own food, we will learn to live without other junk industrial products. All these bullshit industry will start collapsing as well after the food industry collapse. And so all those resources that we save from feeding these bullshit industry can now be either conserved to reduce our footprint, or it can be redirected towards more regenerative uses. Now, the next question that I get is how to produce sustainable ecosystem for ourselves, if not on a global scale, but on a communal scale. And I'm glad you said if not on a global scale, because try not to create anything on a global scale. That's one size fit all. That's kind of hubris again, right? Work on a local level and let the superstructure emerge organically. Top-down superstructures are the problem that we're trying to solve, okay? Because if you go beyond the number and other people stop being people, they start becoming labels, and what you have is just now civil war between labels, left and right, white and black and Asian and gender and nationalities and classes. So if you live within the resources you have locally, within reasons, sometimes it's difficult to do certain things, you're by definition almost sustainable. But if you try to do the reverse, which is to keep your existing lifestyle and try to make that lifestyle sustainable, it will be very hard. And usually what happens is you end up in techno fantasy. The next question I get is, what elements of our current system can we leverage and how do we work together? That's the easy one, because I actually use whatever resources I can find to build a structure that will eventually allow me to rely only on regenerative one. Just like what I was telling you, right? Keep your job, work remotely, use all that resources to build something new. There's no need to kind of completely divorce yourself. Do it in a stepwise fashion, but be very aware. Don't use anything that will end up using you. If you become bound to it, you become reliant so much that you can't give it up. And that is from the old industrialized mindset. You are corrupted by it, and eventually you end up in square one. So when you use the resources to build something new, be very aware. Do not let it control you. In transition time, I don't know if some of you are familiar with the transition movement, and they have a lingo. It's called an energy descent plan. So in the beginning, you're completely within the current system, but step by step, you wean yourself off until you become self-sufficient almost. So that's how you do it. Use everything you have, but don't let it control you. Next question, what's the best and most efficient collective action that we can try? And what are the potential roles for harsh authoritarian measure versus sacrifices and contribution made by aware and motivated individual, given we have so little time left? So that's a wonderful question, because there is a temptation, a allure to authoritarianism. Like a strong man will come and make us sustainable because we can't do it on our own, right? But let me tell you, authoritarianism will very likely only give you option 1 or option 2. If you want option 3, it has to be community driven and ground up. Why? Because the temptation to say, hey, look, now that you have the power, why don't we take it for ourselves? We can live like kings and control the rest as slaves. The temptation is too great. Maybe there's 1 or 2 exceptional people that could pull it off, but more often than not, you end up with false prophet giving false promises, and then you end up with option 1 and 2. So we need to do this ourselves. Hasten the collapse of industrialized agriculture is a lever that will lead to this system change we want. And as they collapse, more of the superstructure that is preventing this, the authoritarian superstructure, the giant banks, the giant corporation, the corrupt government, these are actually all authoritarian figures. These will be so occupied trying to keep themselves afloat that we have the space to build alternative. And yes, we have so little time left. Yeah, and that is absolutely true. We don't know how much we can build. So we need to build the very first thing that will buy us time, the food system, so that we won't starve. If we get that done in time before the collapse happens, then we can, from the base of the food system, build everything else. Now, what we'll be able to build will not be the cushy, industrialized urban comfort zone we all know today. But it will be more fulfilling because we will have deeper relationship And the focus is on taking care of the earth and each other rather than acquiring material luxury and in a very empty life. Okay, so what we'll be building is different. It's not material luxury, but it will be more fulfilling. And to motivate people to do that, you need to tell them the truth, what's coming. You either be prepared or you be caught with your pants down and be made a slave or you die. So that has to be very, very clear. That's how you deal with the fact that we have so little time left. Okay, so who are the people to reach as a critical constituency? Part of that question seems to always kind of point back towards the elite, right? Can we persuade the elite because they control most of the resources? Yeah, like I said, there's all these problems. Maybe the foundation, it could be a good way, good critical constituency to reach. They have the checkbook, and if they will be willing to fund something like what I'm describing, give the fund to buy land and then to create all these community agriculture, it'll be wonderful. But don't forget, all these funds are founded and run by the captains of industry. When the collapse is coming, who's to say they will not use that money to prop the current system up instead? We don't know. Maybe if we start early, maybe we can get some of that resource out. I won't bank on it. And the rest of the elites are so many of them are still in denial or fantasizing about going to Mars and underground bunker and all the rest of it. Work on the people who really will make a difference. I mean, I know they control a lot of resources, but don't waste your time. There are some. I mean, some of my friends are wealthy tech people who are not bedazzled by the singularity techno-utopian church, and they want to do something. But they are also cautious, right? They don't know if it's going to work. But they're also very well informed, and they follow many, many trends. So build a thriving new food system and they will come. There's no need to persuade them. Do it now. They are well informed. They find out about it. They will come. Okay, going towards the end. Last two questions. How does this transition feel for me on a personal level? I love that question. I'll tell you a story if we have time. When I first started weeding, my first year of farming, growing my own food, I started weeding and I was thinking, oh my God, this is so hard. I mean, my back is aching, I'm not used to squatting down on the land, working on my land, and so on and so forth. And I started to have compassion for Monsanto. As I realized, yeah, that's why we want to have pesticides and insecticide. One spray and it's done, right? I'm spending hours on it, it's still so little done. And I've started having compassion for greenwashing. It's so difficult to do the real thing. Let's just pretend and do some fake thing and call it that, call it green. Yeah, we all look for comfort and ease. That's part of us. We all want that. So we need to accept that in ourselves. Monsanto is not some evil that's completely divorced from humanity. They are motivated by the same thing we are all motivated by, which reminds me of Zhuangzi. I'm a Chinese literature major, so a lot of what I draw comes from ancient Chinese tradition. And Zhuangzi tells of a story of a Confucian student meeting this guy who was carrying water from underground. So he created a tunnel that slowly goes slope into the ground until it reaches water. So he walks in there with a container, scoops out the water and carries it laborious all the way up to the top of the ground again to water his plant. And Confucian students said to him, hey, this is stupid. You could create a well and then you can put a lever system and then you can just pull the lever and the water comes up and it's so much less work. And this guy said to him, of course I know that. I'm not stupid. But you see, if you start using machinery to do what you could do, and you start trying to take advantage of nature, that motivation will make you want to take advantage of other people and everything's around you, and you'll be corrupted by that. I know about this, but I'm disdainful of it, and I refuse to do it. Now, Zigong went back to tell Confucian the story and said, God, I met this wonderful man, and Confucian said to him, no, actually, what he is doing is he only knows how to cultivate his internal virtue, but he doesn't know how to cultivate the external one, which is the one that uses like technology. A true follower of Tao, the internal and the external are the same. They are not differentiated. He will cultivate one at the same time as he cultivates the other, which is the point I was making. You use whatever resources you have, but you don't let it control you because you know within yourself what truly is important. And that's how you use technology. If you don't, you become what that first person fear. He fear technology will control him, so he chooses not to use, which is great. But the next level, Confucian says, is when you integrate both. So my personal feeling in this whole transition is always working at both the inner ethical development in order to be at a level where I could use a particular technology without it controlling me. And that is what transition feels like for me. It's a constant working within yourself so that you can wean yourself from the toxic tit of predatory capitalism, but still not going into primitivism. Like we should live like caveman, because if we have any technology at all, we are down the path of self-destruction. We can't say that the only way to be virtuous is for us to live like animals. And that's why Confucius was so right. He said you have the inner and the outer has to be one. And then there is hope. Corollary is I need to meditate every day because it is so vital. This is not an external journey. It is even more an internal journey. Final question is, have I studied various civilization collapse, and what can we learn? One of my favorite scholar of collapse is Professor Joseph Tainter. His basic thing is that collapse happens when society becomes more complex, and society becomes more and more complex because we're trying to solve more and more problems. And so it always ends up collapse. What is interesting is Dr. Samuel Alexander, who kind of writing against Tainter. His point is basically what I'm trying to say too. Like if you can integrate the two, then you can create regenerative technology and not fall into that collapse trap. Okay, I'm happy to answer questions. Do you have any?
Thank you, Chong Kee. This was absolutely wonderful. Ken, would you like to voice that over?
I'll start with a thank you. Having followed Bucky Fuller's work since 1987 and Joanna Macy's work and what's going on in the world for the last 35 years, nothing you said is surprising or too disheartening because I've known about this. But what I am concerned about is that as I listen to you, it sounds like the path you're laying out means a lot of people who aren't convinced of the problem are going to die in the cities as industrialization dies out. So how do we handle that? I mean, if there's going to be a massive die-off, is it possible to do it consciously? Is it possible to bring as many people along as we can?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I mean the way of what I'm describing is a process to bring as many people as you can from the city, because when you talk about the reverse Lewis model, it is basically this: is the rural now pulling people from the city because of rising food prices, because of rising costs, and it becomes less and less tenable to even live in the city. So they have no choice. The city is basically pushing them out, right? So we need to start building out the capacity of the rural so that we can start accommodating people who are coming out. And we need to do that as quickly as possible so that we can bring as many people along as possible. But we need to do it with a very clear, not romanticized eyes. Otherwise, you'll be so heartbroken when you see more and more people that you cannot bring along. Because we have this overshoot that is so massive. I don't know, maybe someone who way smarter than me could figure this out, but I can't. If you do the math, you can't quite accommodate without oil. Well, here's the reverse. To think through this, there may be a possibility. If you remember, there is a UN report that says the only way to feed the current world population now is through small-scale organic farming. That means get rid of all these giant farms, make it all into small farms and get people there. So we are feeding almost 8 billion people right now. So it is possible because the productivity of small organic farm will be much higher than industrial farm. It is possible. But that project is massive because we need to teach people these skills. We need to have them move, and we have so little time. But yes, theoretically, probably yes. Practically, we need to really move the earth to get there. And the sooner we start, the better.
Thank you, Chong Kee. The way you describe potential scenarios to me sounds like a fair competition of ideas. Do you see any potential conflict or opposition or active attempts to stop option 3 from manifesting?
Right now, I'm not seeing any concerted attempt actually from either government or giant corporation to stop option 3 because they think it's negligible. And it is pretty negligible right now. It's not a threat right now. So no one is paying attention to it. However, there is a pretty large resistance of option 3 actually from within the green movement because of all that myth that if we recycle, we can save the planet. If we drive an electric car, if we ban plastic bag. I mean, there's all these token action that's driven by the environmental movement that convince people that if they only do these few things, we can carry on business as usual. And I think that is what's making many, many people who otherwise would have done something more very complacent. So that is what I'm trying to break through, actually. And if you remember when Michael Moore's Planet of Human came out, the biggest voices against him are from the green movement and from the techno-utopians. So in fact, we are fighting against ourselves right now to move off industrialized economy.
My question is from a point of, especially in the developing countries right now, it is sort of a late industrial revolution, if I may put it that way. And how do you even start convincing people that are in rural land coming into the city and think it's the hype thing, it's the legit thing, it's the in thing to go? And the reality on the ground is they know about global warming, they know about the environment, catastrophes which are happening around them, but even starting to convince them that we need to go back to where we were is a whole other complexity in itself. So how do you even start convincing people who literally have seen an iPhone for the first time and have gotten to start to use a truck or tractor in their farming and revert back to that? When people realizing that now that we know oil is making our life comfortable, why would we want to go back? Even if you put it in a doom and gloom way, it still won't reach majority.
Mm-hmm. The amount of soil erosion that's happening in Africa in various parts when they implemented the Western farming technique is mind-boggling. You have literally within 1 or 2 years, erosion so deep, it cuts down 100 feet underneath, creating massive canals on land, exposing ancient tree roots. It is so mind-boggling. The way for me is to really communicate that to the people. This is what the medicine that the West is selling to you is doing to your land and doing to your people. And for example, the Monsanto moving into India, setting up waves of hundreds of thousands of Indian farmers committed suicide. I mean, there's these things happening around the world right now. And the good news is India now has come out against Monsanto, as has Mexico, Colombia, and many other countries in the global south. They see how destructive this whole myth of the green revolution is to countries that had real green agriculture for centuries. So we need to get that message out. We must not let the glittering lies be the main story. We need to make that massive destruction they're causing right now be the main story.
If I can say, the industrial giants who are established in such communities or such countries are the ones who are leading the drive towards the glitter of the information, but also the underlying factor is siphoning as much as they can at the same time. And people can't see that until like it's too late. Where we can say in the first world, the economic downfall starting to show its cracks. But now with a freshly developing country where people are still not able to see it. Even if you state it, even if you show graphs, it's always a mentality of that's not my home, that's not where I live, or that's not connected to who I am. They always drive it away, and it's a very well packaged information by global giants. For example, how the oil industries are the ones who are investing in the green effect of how electronic cars and everything, they're the ones who are putting enough money there and no one else is. So even if we tell people how things are, they always have a counter argument of saying, but they can't do this to us. For example, if you plant maize for 6 months and then you add fertilizer, you add everything that you needed, and then it looks healthy in 3 months, how do you even start to explain to someone that the 6-month one was done correctly, but the 3-month one was made using toxins? Because at the end of the day, they look at their table, are their bellies full? Are their communities moving and progressive? And if the giant industrial companies are helping them, masquerading as the savior of their communities, then where do you even start convincing them that what you were doing before was the legit thing?
Well, in that case, it's not as difficult as, for example, the India farmers found out, right? Because the first year they have great yields, but the yields start to drop. And then they start discovering that their input costs, because now they have to buy fertilizer, they have to buy pesticides, they have to buy herbicides, their input costs actually went up while their yields start going down. And that is actually what's happening in America and in all industrial countries. We all know that. That's what happens when you do this industrialized farming. The first 2-3 years is wonderful because your soil microbes is still kind of alive, supporting everything and just giving them a super boost with the fertilizer. But as you do that, they die off, the soil microbes die off, and then the plant's yield actually start decreasing. And then you start putting more and more fertilizer, you're getting less and less yield. And before you know it, within 5 years, your input cost is higher than what you had before, while your yield is lower than what you had before. So this whole myth is self-destruct within 5 years or less, depending on how much chemicals you use. So this is not difficult. The problem is they keep going to new places, new location that has not done it before, just like they do it in the US and in other places, right? So you need to publicize all those places they had been before. Their story needs to be told because it's not a new story anymore. That's how you convince people not to believe in that lie.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chong Kee. Any closing remarks?
It's a huge daunting task, and we have kicked the bucket down the road for too long. And in fact, we had been for a long time our own enemy, trying to not panic and give hope and change and all the rest, instead of saying this is super serious and it is a massive thing and we should have started 30, 40 years ago. The time for cautious is over. This is our final last push to save human civilization, really. The earth will save itself. In 10 million years, nature will correct itself. Our project is really we're not trying to save the earth. We're not trying to save the environment. We are trying to save humans as a species. Can we do that in a way that would have enough meaning for human left behind to have a life that is fulfilling? That is actually our project. So let's really get fired up and start doing something. We spend so much time talking, and let's just start doing. That's all. Thank you.